Hi, welcome to YTV and this week's segment of Everybody Has a Story. Jessica Garland is a junior in Davenport College and Nia Holston is a senior in Jonathan Edwards College, and they're here today to tell us about their experiences with prison education, reform, and policy through their work at the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project, this is a relatively new thing at Yale. Can you tell me how this started, where the idea came from, and how you guys got this off the ground?
Yeah, so starting freshman year, I became part of an organization called the Manson Education Initiative, and that's been going on for about 8 years. Students go every Saturday and Sunday to Manson Youth Prison in Cheshire, Connecticut, and help young men there prepare for their GEDs. So it's a men's youth prison, so from about 14 to 21-year-olds we're working with. And that was a relatively small program, and we didn't really have anything besides tutoring involved with that. Then at the end of December or November of last year, Nia decided that we should move beyond just tutoring and do advocacy and awareness as well, and started a mass incarceration discussion group.
Right, so I previously was the Black Student Alliance at Yale's political action chair. And so what I really found that was missing about a lot of the dialogue at Yale is that there were a lot of people who were interested or becoming interested in mass incarceration issues, but there wasn't any space to have a dialogue about those issues and the various manifestations that they have. So I created the mass incarceration discussion group. So it's just a small, informal meeting of people who were interested and people that I knew. And what I realized were most of the people who came out to the event were from Manson Education Initiative. And so I think at the same time that Manson was thinking about making this a larger widespread thing, I was looking for a way to formalize the discussion group. And so we just kind of combined, and it worked really well together. So I became their advocacy chair.
And what drew you to these issues? I mean, for both of you, because there are a lot of students on campus that seem to be oblivious, to some of the issues and to some of the startling statistics. Why should they care about it, and what drew you to these issues?
Right. So I mean, I think we should say that there's been a huge growth of interest in this issue, particularly in the 4 years that I've been here. I've seen it grow leaps and bounds. But I really think, I think one of the reasons why people should care about this is because you want everyone to have their full humanity shown, right? And you want everyone to not be judged by the worst thing that they've done, right? And so we as Yaleys, we're not perfect. We're not perfect beings, but we have the luxury of being judged by being a Yalie. And for the most part, people who have criminal records are judged solely on their criminal record. And I think that's wrong, because I think there's so much more to people than their criminal record. For something that could have been as simple as a low-level drug offense, as we know, and it has devastating impacts on people's lives. And particularly when we're talking about tutoring, I think a lot of Yaleys are very interested in tutoring in New Haven, and that's their way of service in New Haven, which is great. And I mean, by tutoring, I mean tutoring in elementary schools and reading to kids and stuff, and that's great and wonderful and totally necessary. But I think there's a piece missing to that when you're tutoring the kid and and I've done a lot of tutoring as well. So you're tutoring the kid, and it feels good, and you're teaching him how to read, but that same kid has a father who can't get a job because he has a criminal record. And so you need to attack the issue from a wide range of places, and prison is just one way to start with that.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Nia's been saying. Also, I think a lot of kids at Yale think about what our place as Yaleys are in New Haven, and crime and incarceration is a huge part of what most people in New Haven experience, although we don't, and helping to alleviate a lot of the issues that come with incarceration, I think, are really important to be a productive member of our community.
So one of the first advocacy initiatives that the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project took part in started this summer when there was an announcement that the government was going to transfer a lot of female prisoners from the federal prison in Danbury, the women's prison in Danbury, to Alabama, 1,000 miles away. You fought to stop this transfer, and you were partially successful, I understand it. Why was that issue important, and what routes of advocacy did you take to try and stop that?
So Danbury is the only women's federal prison in the Northeast, so every woman who's incarcerated from the Northeast will go there if they're incarcerated for a federal crime. And what's, I think, one of the most important things when you're incarcerated is to keep close familiar connections, and that also has shown through many studies that the best predictor of people having a low recidivism rate, meaning a low chance of going back into prison, if they were able to keep strong connections with their So you can imagine if a woman is transferred to Alabama and her family lives somewhere in the Northeast, maybe Maine, maybe New York, it's going to be very hard for them to get there, especially where the prison was going to be located in Aliceville, Alabama, that does not have a major airport or train station or bus station. And it's not only the women that this is really going to affect, but it's also going to affect their children, because most of these women have children, and you can imagine the effect on a child of having their mother transferred hundreds of miles away and not being able to see them for some of them maybe most of their lives as they're growing up. So we really cared about this issue and did, I think, our best to help prevent it.
Yeah, a lot of our work is definitely credited to professors at the law school who were already at the forefront of this, and wrote several op-eds and had been doing extensive research before we even got involved. And Jesse and I knew a couple of professors, and we talked about about ways to get involved with them. And they said essentially that there was no grassroots movement at that time, right? And so that what was missing, you had all the research, you had all the people in elite circles who were doing stuff, but you needed people who were willing to organize about this. And so what we tried to do is we tried to fill some of the gap. We couldn't fill all of it, obviously, but we tried to fill some of the gap. So what we did was primarily we went around to dining halls and got people to sign petitions and letters to Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal, but also to Charles Samuel, the director of the Board of Prisons, the Bureau of Prisons, excuse me. So we did a lot of that, and then we also worked with different community groups as well that were organizing as well and doing great things, and different student groups as well. So we did some stuff with the Women's Center. We talked about it with the Yale Dems, and so it was a really good issue to galvanize upon. And it's seen that yes, you're right. We've had partial success, but the work doesn't end there. There are still things that we're looking at to advocate for, and that it was a partial success, and that's great. But there's still more to be done.
I have to say the Senators Blumenthal and Murphy did an incredible job on this issue and pushed really hard to make sure that the women didn't get moved.
Now, the women's prison in Danbury, I understand it, was the basis for Piper Kerman's memoir, Orange is the New Black, which was made into the hit Netflix TV show. She was incarcerated in Danbury. Have you seen a spike in interest in prison reform and these issues with shows like Orange is the New Black? And do you think that those shows and her memoir have promoted the right perception about prison and women in prison?
So we were doing a lot of advocacy work about the Danbury issue, and this isn't an issue that a lot of people were aware of. So we asked Piper Kerman to come speak at Yale, and she spoke, and it was incredible, and got a lot of people to come listen and learn not only about the Danbury prison issue, but also about mass incarceration in general, and in particular women who are incarcerated. I think so through that, there is a definite spike in the interest in this issue and how many people volunteered to help us out after she came. So that was incredibly beneficial for the movement, I think.
Yeah, so definitely. So I think Justin's right. I think there's always a danger with telling a story in a television format of not telling the whole story or telling an imperfect story. But it was a necessary one, and I'm so glad that it was able to be produced on major television. And I have seen a spike in the people who are interested in talking about this issue. And Piper Kerman himself was one of the first people to say, hey, this is my story, and I'm going to tell it, but this doesn't mean that the racial disparities in prisons aren't very apparent, and that Black and Latino and people of color aren't grossly overrepresented in our system of incarceration in this country. And so that's a vital story that needs to be told. This is one story, but hopefully it can be a gateway for more stories. And there are so many stories that are so important and so vital that need to be told.
So playing off some of those issues, Nelson Mandela, who recently passed away in December, popularized the following quote, which is, "It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails," end quote. Now you two have had a unique opportunity to be inside these prisons, to work with these prisoners. What would you want Yale students to know about the experiences that you've seen?
So what we hear from a lot of the young men and women that we work with is that no matter how many tests they pass or books they read, they won't be able to get a good job when they get out or make enough money to support their family. And that's because of the stigmatization that comes with having a record, and also the inability to get a good job, because when you apply for most jobs, there's a question on the application that says whether or not have spent time in prison. You need to fill that out. New Haven recently in 2011 actually passed a law saying that it's not allowed on public applications, which is wonderful and allows people a much more fair chance of getting good jobs in the city. That's a movement that's spreading across the country. It's called Ban the Box, but it hasn't happened everywhere yet. But I think that's the number one thing, is just to understand that these people are actual people, and the effects of how you think about them can hamper their lives and their ability to move forward.
So you bring up the Ban the Box initiative, which, as you said, has spread across the United States. But do you think that the critics of Ban the Box have some legitimate concerns? Is this an undue burden on private businesses? Why shouldn't a private business be able to say, we don't want to hire employees with a criminal record?
So I think there's a lot of confusion around about what it actually means to have a criminal record in the first place, and it's varied across the country, but it means a lot of different things. Like, and first, there's a dramatic bias in terms of how we arrest people, how we prosecute people, and how we convict people, right? So Blacks and Latinos are much more likely at every stage of contact within the criminal justice system to be arrested in the first place, to be convicted, and as well as to be prosecuted. So that's also another issue. So when you're dealing with these issues, you have to also think about them in terms of the racial bias that is present within the system, and who gets convicted and who doesn't get convicted, right? So like Yale students who commit crimes are not necessarily being convicted with such intensity as other residents in New Haven, and that's also an important issue to talk about. The second thing that's really important is that this is essentially a second sentence, and so there are things that are labeled the collateral consequences of imprisonment, and those are the consequences of a sentence that are not laid out in the judge's initial sentence, right? So you serve your time, you get out, and as Jesse talked about, you have issues getting housing, issues getting employment, issues getting access to education, and so there are so many different things with that in that protected class. But then beyond that, and to get to your point about protected class, and should you? I think a lot of the argument is, well, should you be giving these people giving the jobs to people who have played by the rules and did their fair share, and instead of people who have done time in prison. So I've already refuted some of that, but also the bigger issue here is that people are interconnected, right? And so when you're not hiring someone with a criminal record, you're not hiring someone's father, you're not hiring someone's uncle, you're not hiring someone's friend, and especially if it's based upon misinformation about what a criminal record actually is and what it means to have certain things on your sentence in the first place, then that's also a serious problem, and we really need to talk about whole communities that are being swallowed up by the system of mass incarceration in the first place, and that's what we're getting to. It's not a separate class of people.
So I just want to end it. The title of this segment is "Everybody Has a Story," and you both have encountered, I imagine, lots of stories with your work with these prisoners. Is there one that sticks out in your mind that you're proud of, or taught you a very important lesson about the work you do?
So my favorite part of tutoring is teaching a class that I teach with Ezra Richin at the New Haven jail, which is about a 10-minute walk from where we are right now at the Yale Daily News. And it's a class that we teach people on how to read by reading rap songs. And originally we were doing reading by reading GED books and the necessary materials for that. And people really weren't that interested in it, understandably so, because the material didn't relate to their lives. So we started teaching a class on how to read by reading rap songs, and that really struck a chord with a lot of the young men that we work with, because they can really relate to what they're doing, and they've improved a lot, and that's really inspiring.
Right, so I've been lucky enough to participate in several voter registration drives for persons with convictions, and one of the things that has definitely stuck out to me is that how so many people with conviction, what's out there in the media is that these people don't want to vote anyway and they don't deserve the right to vote, but how so many people who came up to me, really didn't know that they had the right to vote, but when I told them that they did, that changed everything, and they were so engaged. And actually, through the voter registration drive that the city of New Haven did 2 years ago in 2012, we had they actually had a 54% voter turnout of the people that we registered, and so that's pretty high compared to the national average, I think, and shouldn't be surprising because so many people care and are so much more than their criminal record. So that's what I would say.
Jessica, Garland, Nia Holston, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cody.
Thank you.
And as always, thank you for joining us for YTV. I'm Cody Pomeranz. We'll see you after spring break, where you can look for more interviews with General Stanley McChrystal and global health expert Professor Elizabeth Bradley here at Yale. See you next time.